What's up guys, it's Haley. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are okay with me wearing my pajamas right now. This is like a straight grandma muumuu. I got it at the thrift store, actually with my friend Bunny, who a lot of you guys know. But today I wanted to do a video that was totally different. I've been getting a lot of comments lately saying that people like my voice, which I think is a really awesome compliment, because when I am editing videos and hear my own voice, I personally don't like the sound of it, but I think that's true with a lot of people. So today I was hoping I could use my voice to tell a scary story, or I think I'm gonna tell 2 scary stories. My absolute favorite videos to watch on YouTube are actually people like Busta and Mr. Nightmare and people who tell scary stories. I think they're so fascinating. I'm a huge fan of anything horror, so I'm kind of hoping to do something along those lines, and if you guys enjoy this, I'm definitely down to make more of these. I'm going to be reading 2 stories off of the website called Jezebel.com. I googled just like terrifying short stories, and I read through probably 25 or so to find some that I really enjoyed and that were a good length for a YouTube video. Without further ado, let's begin. This story is called Vinka, and it's by Benthic Born. In the early 70s, my Aunt Sarah studied education at a college in a very conservative small town. Sarah lived on campus while her boyfriend Jack, who eventually became my uncle, lived in a crappy house in a crappy part of town off of campus. Because the college was in an industrial town, they were surrounded by really big feedlots and beef packing plants, or slaughterhouses, that ran 24 hours a day, and among the blue-collar force work were many undocumented workers that were paid under the table and lived off the grid. Part of my aunt's coursework for her degree was going into the local district and trying to help illegal immigrant families get resources for their kids, stuff like free lunches or prenatal care if the moms were pregnant. Mostly the work was depressing as hell. The families wanted the resources, but they didn't want to bring any attention to their undocumented status. It was just a disaster. Uncle Jack lived across the street from a crappy apartment building that housed several of these families, and often groups of children would be playing outside. One day while visiting, my aunt noticed this kid, a 5 or 6-year-old little girl, sitting alone on the apartment's crumbling balcony. After that, whenever she'd visit during the week, day or night, the girl would be there. But she was always gone on weekends. There were a lot of people who lived in these units, so on the weekends there would be tons of kids of all ages running around, tearing crap up, generally being little jerks like kids do. They moved into the house in August, so it was blazing hot and the sun didn't set until almost 10 at night, so the kids were always out running around. Any given weekday though, that kid would be sitting there all by herself, just staring over at them well into the evening. My aunt said at first she just thought it was sad the kid didn't have anybody really looking after her. But then it started turning to fall, and the days were getting shorter and colder. One night my uncle was walking my aunt out to her car, and she remarked to him that the little girl wasn't out there, a relief because it was getting so cold. But then a car turned down the street with its brights on, and when the headlights hit the balcony of that apartment building, the kid was still there. My aunt said she must have been wearing dark clothes, because when the headlights passed over her, all they could really see was this very pale little face, the headlights washing away all of her features. She'd been there the entire time. They just hadn't seen her because it was so dark. That was a turning point for my aunt. By now, she was into her internship with the district, and she was doing a lot of outreach. So one weekend afternoon, when it was still pretty nice outside, she and my uncle approached the families mingling outside. She asked about the little girl, but no one would talk to her. She said even the kids pretended not to be able to understand her. Winter came, and still the little girl could be seen on the balcony, appearing like she wasn't even wearing a coat. At this point, my aunt decided to stage an intervention to get the kid a jacket and maybe even enroll her in school. So she sees the kid one morning and heads across the street and up the stairs that lead to the 2nd level. By the time she gets there, the kid is gone. My aunt didn't hear any footsteps, she didn't hear any doors closing, nothing. My aunt figures it's the same thing from before. They're just scared of an outsider. But now she's even more determined than ever because this kid clearly needs some resources. That week it snowed, so when the weekend comes, a bunch of the little jackals that were living across the street were outside stockpiling snowballs to throw at each other. My aunt has learned from the last time, so this time she doesn't take my uncle, but she does take candy and a bunch of silver dollars. The older kids avoid her like the plague, but a couple of the little ones come over and my aunt starts asking about the little girl. The kids are way more interested in the candy and silver dollars than the questions, and most of them refuse to answer until one of them finally says, Vinka, the name of the child my aunt presumes. She'd never heard of a name like that, but gives the little kids some candy and money anyway, which eventually entices the older kids to start talking to her until she asks about Vinka. Then the older kids completely clam up. They gather all the little ones, and in 30 seconds, everyone is gone. One winter evening, when it was extremely dark, my aunt saw the kid again. By now it was absolutely freezing out. There had been an ice storm the night before, and that child was still out there. Flipping out, my aunt headed over, fully intending to get the kid and call the cops because it wasn't just neglect at this point, it was abuse. When she finally made it up the apartment building's icy stairs, the kid was once again gone, which finally got my aunt to freak out because there was no way a kid could have moved that fast on icy concrete, and she knows that none of the doors to any of the apartments were open. Still, she pulled it together and decided to walk the length of the balcony just to make sure the girl wasn't there. Reaching the midway point, where this girl was always sitting, she saw, deep in the ice, these, she didn't know what to call them. They weren't footprints because they weren't shaped like feet, not even little feet. And they weren't just on top of the ice, they were all the way through it, down to the bare concrete. It was like the kid had been standing there during the ice storm the previous night and the ice had built up around her feet. Terrified, my aunt tore off the balcony and down the stairs, managing to trip and take a spectacular chunk out of her shin on the way. She still has the scar today. After making it to my uncle's house and saying what happened, he and two of his roommates headed over to check it out while she stayed back and had someone patch up her leg. After about 10 minutes, the guys came back and told her that yeah, they saw the footprints, though none of them could come up with any explanation, and they tried to play it off, working out all these different scenarios that seemed plausible, like maybe there had been some empty cups or something sitting there, and the girl had kicked them off the ledge, and that made those weird footprint things. They convinced her that if they went over and looked in the morning, they'd probably find some cups on the ground. And then they said that maybe my aunt hadn't seen the girl at all. At this point, they'd all seen the girl, at least once. She was always over there. But they pointed out that they all got so used to seeing her that my aunt probably just saw a shadow and took it for granted that it was the girl. Which really didn't make any sense if they really thought the girl had kicked over some cups, but whatever. After winter finals, my uncle and his roommates decided to throw a giant kegger before everyone headed home for Christmas. It was the first time my aunt had been back to the house since all the stuff on the balcony had happened, but everything now seemed fine. The little girl is nowhere to be seen. The party ends up being low-key, with only my uncle, his roommates, their girlfriends, and one roommate's sister, Marisol, in attendance. The night wore on and another ice storm began outside, causing the power to go out and the roommates to light a fire in their fireplace. They were all fairly trashed at this point, and one of the roommates brought up the weird footprints, something they'd yet to speak of out loud. Finally, around the fire, my uncle and two of his roommates admitted that it actually was creepy as hell. I know it's not possible, but it looked like, began one of the guys. A giant hoof, or a pig hoof, filled in the other roommate, leaving my uncle to remark, yeah, like something was standing there with cloven feet. The entire energy in the room, according to my aunt, was still uneasy when the roommate, who said it looked like a goat hoof, turned around. What's the girl's name again? Velma? Vinka, my aunt corrected. My aunt says you could have heard a pin drop at this point, but eventually, someone changed the subject and everyone continued to drink and goof around. At some point, however, my aunt went into the kitchen and was followed by Marisol, the roommate's sister. Alone in the kitchen, Marisol, a weird expression on her face, asked, "Did you say the girl's name was Vinka?" My aunt nodded, saying that that was what the kids had told her across the street. Marisol nodded and didn't say anything for a while. But when my aunt turned to leave, Marisol put a hand on her arm and said, "It wasn't Vinca. It was Venga. It's slang. It means come here in Spanish." And that's when Marisol told my aunt the story. It was the first year the district and the college tried the internship my aunt was participating in, and Marisol, participating in the program, was stuck literally going door to door, trying to find the families with kids that needed to be enrolled into school. She got a hell of a lot further than my aunt ever got because she spoke fluent Spanish. The family still didn't like her nosing around, but they would at least speak to her. Marisol says she went to another crappy apartment building, not the one across the street from my uncle's rental, but close. While there, she saw all of these kids, including a little girl dressed in dark clothes, who appeared to be by herself. So Marisol talked to the more friendly kids and their families, convincing them that they can qualify for services, and going to school is really a good thing to be doing. Getting up to go, she asked about the little girl she saw outside. Upon mentioning her, an older woman, probably a grandmother or a great-grandmother, crossed herself and shook her head. She told Marisol that what she saw wasn't a little girl. It was a bad spirit, and Marisol should forget she ever saw her. At the time, she figured that maybe the kid was illegal, or possibly stolen or sold to another family. Sadly, it happens. But then, when she tried to really think back to the girl's features, nothing came to mind. Sort of blank. Just a general impression of a girl in dark clothes. Over the weeks and months, Marisol started to eavesdrop, and more she would hear about this Venga girl. Apparently she was called that because she would whisper Venga and try to lead people off into the woods. Marisol wasn't clear on what supposedly happened to anyone who dared follow her, and according to the conversation she overheard, all of the kids knew better than to go with her, or else they'd be beaten within an inch of their lives by a granny armed with a wooden spoon. She then swore that she would catch glimpses of this kid in different places around town. By this point in the story, my aunt was super drunk and totally freaked out. Getting away from Marisol as quickly as she could, she informed my uncle that he needed to take her back to the dorm. Heading away from the apartment and by this wooded area, my uncle, either because of the ice storm or because he was drunk, ended up hitting a curb hard enough to blow out a tire. It being the middle of the night and freezing, he left my aunt in the car and got out alone to change the tire by the light of the flare, the only light source he had. In the car, my aunt was terrified. The red light of the flare was bouncing off the ice and flashing everywhere, and there, in the woods, about 20 feet ahead, is the girl. The flare was bright enough for my aunt to get a good look at her face, except there wasn't one. The face was perfectly pale and featureless. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. It was just completely smooth. Even over the sound of the heater and the radio, my aunt says she could hear the girl whispering, "Venga," to her, and she could see her crooking a finger toward her. This was the first time my aunt saw the girl's hand. They were bleeding, with long, cracked fingernails. And her feet were not feet. They were hooves. At this point, my uncle climbed back into the car, and my aunt, pointing him to the girl, finds that she was gone. The next morning, as soon as the sun was up, they packed up and drove all the way home for the holidays. After that, my aunt refused to go back to the house, and they never saw the girl ever again. Alright, you guys, I am going to read one more story off of the same website. This one is called 911 Calling, submitted by the user Indiana Joan. This took place when I was about 10 years old. My mom had rather quickly filed for divorce, but she had only a part-time job and made very little money, so finding a place to stay that was affordable and available immediately was tough. A friend of hers told her that she and her husband had a little mobile home that was currently sitting empty, and we could rent it practically for free until we figured out something else. I immediately didn't like the house. Part of this, I'm sure, was due to my parents' abrupt divorce and having my life turned upside down on a whim, but it was also just the house itself. We lived in a mountain town, and this mobile home was way up a steep, mile-long driveway. Beautiful pine trees surrounded it, but the house itself looked abandoned and out of place. It had 2 bathrooms and 2 bedrooms, so my brother and I shared a room, and my mom took the bedroom with the attached bathroom. It was a very 70s home, with wood paneling and dated fixtures. There were also areas that showed strange damage, like holes in the wall that were badly patched up. For whatever reason, I immediately refused to use the hallway bathroom. I wouldn't even step into it. My mom never really asked me why or questioned it, but let me use her own bathroom. Anyways, my mom was gone a lot trying to find whatever work she could, so I would be home alone a lot after school and on the weekends. Each time I received the 911 call, I was by myself. My mom always told us not to answer the door, but we should always answer the phone just in case it was for her. So when the phone rang one afternoon, I figured it would be my mom since no one else really had our number yet. There was a woman on the phone who sounded very concerned. "Hello, this is 911 returning your call. We received your call, but we got disconnected," the woman said. I immediately got a sick feeling. I told her that I didn't call 911, and she asked me if there was anyone else in the house who may have called. I said I was home alone, but I started to get really worried that maybe I wasn't. She said she would dispatch police to our address just to make sure everything was okay. At that point, I was terrified to be in the house, so I sat outside and nervously waited for the police, who showed up in about 15 or 20 minutes. The officers asked me if I had called 911, and I said no, but they claimed that I had. The officer just sort of shrugged and said, "This kind of thing sometimes happens. They say it can't, but the numbers can get mixed up. It happens." He gave a curious glance around the outside of the house, and then he left. I tried to convince myself that the officer was right. It was just a mix-up phone call, and hopefully whoever did actually call got the help they needed. About a month later, the same thing happened again. I got another phone call from 911 saying they had received a phone call from my number. I told them again that it must have been a mistake. The woman on the phone scolded me a bit, telling me that 911 wasn't something to play around with and I was preventing other people from getting help. She didn't dispatch any police this time. And again, I was really worried someone was in the house, so I cautiously checked and made sure all the doors were locked. I don't know why, but I always kept the hallway bathroom door closed. Maybe because of the eerie feeling that I got from it. Checking the house, I just knew someone was in that bathroom. I was absolutely petrified. Part of me felt like I needed to open the door to check, maybe to prove myself wrong, but I was way too afraid. So I just sat in the living room, watching the door. It was so quiet in that house that after a few minutes, I swore I started to hear faint little sounds coming from the inside of the bathroom, like some sort of shuffling noise. I asked my mom to check the bathroom when she got home from work, and she quickly looked inside. She made me come to look and see that it was empty, and I was letting my imagination get the better of myself. The 911 calls happened 3 more times over the coming months, and only when I was home by myself. The 4th time, the dispatcher told me that I could face criminal charges for what I was doing, and they were going to contact my parents. I hung up the phone sobbing and terrified. I had that feeling like someone was in the house again, but if I called 911, they probably wouldn't even show up. I felt like the girl who cried wolf, only it wasn't me. It was like someone was playing a horrible, twisted joke on me. I sat and watched the bathroom again, hearing noises like someone dragging their fingers across the door. I decided my mom had to be right and that I was probably just letting my imagination get the better of myself. I decided to try and leave the bathroom door open so I wouldn't get so freaked out by the thought that someone was in there. But then I got the 5th 911 call. This time though, after I hung up the phone with the dispatcher, the bathroom door slammed shut. I ran all the way down our steep driveway and found a place to wait till my mom pulled back home from work. When she arrived, she was angry at me for leaving the house, but she saw how upset I was. I think maybe she thought it was acting out due to the stress of the divorce. I refused to be alone in the house again though, so we worked it out so I would stay later at school or go to a nearby friend's house till she got off of work. Not long after this, we got a notice from my mom's friend saying that we needed to move out of the house because her mom needed a place to stay. I was so grateful to be moving out. I told my mom she needed to tell her friend that something was wrong with the house, but my mom thought it was a ridiculous way to pay back her generosity. I moved around a lot the next few years and tried to forget about that old house. It wasn't until I was older that I really thought about it. I witnessed an accident and had to call 911, and all of the fear and paranoia came flooding back. I decided to do some research, which, honestly, I wish I had never done. I found out that a few years before we had moved in, a woman was killed in the house in some kind of domestic dispute. It was days, though, before she was found, shut up inside of that exact bathroom. Alright, you guys, so that is it for the 2 scary stories I wanted to read to you guys today. I hope you enjoyed them and that they freaked you out just a little bit. If you enjoyed this video, definitely give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment kind of letting me know if you would like to see this again. And also, if you have any of your own scary stories you would like me to read, definitely leave them in the comments, or I will leave my email in the down bar so you can send me an email of your story. I will, of course, credit you and read it on my channel if you guys do indeed like these types of videos. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, I would love if you subscribe, and I hope to see you guys very soon. I love you guys. Bye.